can you ace the GMAT, the EA, or any test that may be required at the school you have your heart set on? Tune in for this show with Apex GMAT co-founder and director of curriculum development, Mike Diamond, for your answer.
Welcome to Admissions Straight Talk, the podcast dedicated to graduate admissions and helping you approach the application process thoughtfully and successfully. Your host is Accepted's founder and world-renowned admissions guru, Linda Abraham. At Accepted, our mission is to get you to that unforgettable moment when you read your acceptance email and shout, "Yes, I'm in!" Confident you'll be attending the perfect program to help you launch the career of your dreams.
Welcome to the 402nd episode of Admissions Straight Talk, Accepted's podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today's featured resource is Accepted's masterclass, Get Accepted to INSEAD. Yikes, INSEAD's last deadline for September 2021 intake is February 26th, and its first deadline for the January 2022 intake is March 5th. Make sure your INSEAD application has all the elements necessary for it to be a success and you to join the INSEAD class of your choice. Join me on Wednesday, February 3rd for this vital masterclass. It's free, but you do need to reserve your seat, and you can do so at it's accepted.com/402MC. Again, you can do so at accepted.com/402MC. It gives me great pleasure to have as a guest on Admissions Straight Talk, Mike Diamond, co-founder and director of curriculum development at Apex GMAT. Mike earned his bachelor's at Brandeis in 2000 and has worked in finance, strategy advising, and political consulting. However, his passion, and what's most important for us today, is the GMAT. And you're going to hear all about that passion or see it in this show. Mike, welcome to Admissions Straight Talk.
Thanks so much, Linda, and thanks for having me.
My pleasure. All right. How first of all, let's look at a little background here. How did you get involved in the test prep business?
Entirely by accident.
Okay.
It's a really fun story. My passion is teaching and helping people. And I've always pursued that in all the various places I've been in my career, and even going back to being a student. And like many, I was sort of the go-to guy for friends, family members, and did this, I wouldn't call it semi-professionally, but as help, as a resource for the people I knew, without paying attention to it as a potential career choice. And I had spent some time working in a hedge fund, and then I was in the world of political consulting, as you had mentioned. And I loved it. I was helping people. I was doing really interesting work. But frankly, I was getting a little jaded, and this is well over a decade ago, and I know a lot more people are jaded these days. But I was getting a little jaded, and I was having a burrito with my best friend's cousin. We're sitting in the Qdoba, and she's brilliant. She's actually an instructor at Manhattan, and she says to me, "Hey, I'm super passionate about Teach for America. I love teaching fourth grade science in North Philly, but I pay my mortgage teaching the GMAT." I said, "Oh, really?" And at the time, I only thought there were sort of the bigger shops, the Kaplans and Princeton Reviews. And frankly, as an educator, and I certainly consider myself an educator, those never held much appeal for me as a place of employment. And I said, "Oh, wow, that's really fascinating." And I had always had a proclivity towards psychometric standardized testing. So about 4 days later, I went in, I did the GMAT, and then I began taking meetings with various GMAT firms. And I was disappointed in what I saw. And there's plenty of great firms and great tutors out there. But once a GMAT business gets beyond a small scale, personalized attention really isn't a priority, and everything defaults to curriculum and just sort of having very bright instructors go through a very prescriptive method for learning how to excel. And there's two problems with that. One is that it only gets a candidate so far. And the other is that it's very one size fits all, and yet one size does not fit all. And so very quickly, everything else went into the rearview mirror. I began Apex with some like-minded instructors, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Wow, that's quite a story. All right. So let's me just ask the basic question is, what is Apex GMAT Prep?
Apex is dedicated to helping people become better thinkers and better learners. And we really consider the GMAT and the results that you get from becoming a better thinker as a result of that deeper process that permits you to be a more creative problem solver, a more critical thinker in your profession, in your MBA, EMBA, or other graduate school program, and in your life, in your relationships, really throughout. There are a core suite of thinking skills that are not taught academically, that come through experience, but also come through having a particularly great teacher or particularly great circumstances with respect to family or mentors on how to approach, and especially the attitudinal adjustments one needs to make, the emotional and psychological adjustments that one has to make to be even in approaching really sort of intractable problems. And most of this is what we focus on. It's not tips, it's not tricks, it's not heuristics. It's how do you enhance your level of skill and become a better thinker all around. And the GMAT score just kind of comes along for the ride.
Got it. And do you do that through classes, tutoring, one-on-one tutoring? What is the method of delivery, if you will? Online, offline? I assume everything is online now, so that's kind of a silly question.
But even prior to COVID, I'd say 90 to 95% of our clients work with us online. We've traveled the entire world, but we have in place a great online learning system, not just a classroom, but an online platform with 6,000 questions and practice exams and all that stuff that you ought to expect with whomever you're working with. But all we do here is customized one-on-one tutoring, helping each individual learner understand their mind and how it works. And different people operate differently, approach things differently. And so a core precept for us is that we don't teach down. It's not about do it this way because that works for me, or if you see this problem, then do it this way. It's about iterating with the client towards those solution paths that work best for them, their proclivities, their wiring, if you will.
Okay. And I mean, I think you might be kind of answering that question with the upcoming question with your last answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways. There are a lot of test prep companies out there. I mean, you said that at the beginning, right? And some of them are excellent. Some of them probably are not so excellent. What does Apex bring to the marketplace that it previously lacked? Or even some tutoring companies out there.
Absolutely. 2 words.
Okay.
Cognitive empathy. It's a term it's a term we use here at Apex, and it's the core filter for an instructor to come join us. All of our instructors have scored at least a 770, but even so, 90% of them don't make the final cut because of this thing we call cognitive empathy, the ability to get inside others' heads, understand how they think, how they're approaching problems, what their preferred learning style is, their method of construal of, are they spatial thinkers? Are they graphic thinkers? Are they narrative thinkers? And the ability to both help others access their own thought process and mentor them to be mindful to their thought process so that they can go in and adjust it and use it to the best effect, and sense the things that clients aren't seeing. And this really is the vital part of the process. It's why you go to a tutor. It's not for someone to run you through a bunch of problems. It's for them to see the things that you can't see, especially if you're already performing well and you're so focused on the task at hand that you can't switch and have enough bandwidth to observe what it is you're doing.
Okay. Can you give us an example to kind of make it a little bit more concrete? Maybe a student that you're particularly proud of who was struggling and you helped?
By way of an example, I actually like to refer to athletics quite a bit. So a tennis coach or a golf coach,
Yeah.
they're there to watch the things that you can't see while you're swinging that club or racket.
Right.
And with respect to clients, there are so many, and we're really proud of every client that comes through our doors, not least because they generally end up exceeding their expectations with respect to the exam. And we have clients every cycle at all the top B schools. But there's a very common thread that exists. And this even happens with our instructors, where after the process, they say, oh my God, I wish I had had this before. I'm so surprised it was so difficult, when it's not, because of the different approach. And so there's this sea change with how one approaches the exam. And one of the things we'd like to say here, at least for the quant side, is if you're doing math, you're doing something wrong. So to get back to one particular example, we had a great client who came in, already doing fairly well, mid 600s, upper 600s, and had been studying for a long time, year and a half, and not getting anywhere. And that's very common, not the length of time, but a lot of people really study hard and then they hit that plateau and they burn themselves out, whether it's going to classes or bouncing between tutors or just sitting there and locking themselves in a room for 6 hours a day on the weekend and 3 hours every week, which, by the way, is way too long to ever spend. If you're putting in more than about 90 minutes, 2 hours a day, you're doing it wrong. You want to focus on high yield prep. But so he's really running himself ragged, and the guy happens to be brilliant. But number one, he didn't believe that, which is problematic. But also, he was looking at the exam in a way that was very transactional, instead of looking at it more like a chess game where there are many different things going on besides the problem in front of you. The timing decisions you make, the understanding of what the test writers are doing and why they're doing it, more importantly, and understanding the signals that the structure of the exam can present. And so in very short order, we were able to sensitize him to those structural signals and also help him adjust his focus onto a more abstract level of construal, on seeing the problems more holistically. And so then he was able to bring all his preparation to bear on the exam, and ended up somewhere in the 750, 760 range in a matter of just a few weeks. And it's one of the ironies, the better one is doing before they come to us, generally the shorter the preparation, because once you get to about the 700 level, the game isn't any longer an intellectual exercise. It's much more a behavioral exercise, and understanding how to change what it is you're doing. I like to call it letting go of the side of the pool. Because when you're a kid, you hold on to the side of the pool. Even if you know how to swim, when you let go, it feels less certain. And success on the GMAT and in tests more generally is about navigating well in uncertainty and having the confidence to propel yourself forward.
Okay, interesting. Now, one thing that's changed certainly in the MBA landscape in the last 10 years is the ability to choose which test you're going to take. So first it was the GMAT only, then it was the GMAT or the GRE. And as of last year, maybe the last 2 years, it became the GMAT, the Executive Assessment, or the GRE, the EA, or GMAT EA or GRE. How do you recommend that applicants, what are some of the differences among these exams, number one? And let's just deal with that question first, and then we'll get to who should choose what.
Absolutely. Before I go into the differences, and there are some very real differences, I do want to point out something very controversial.
Okay.
They're all kind of the same.
Okay.
All of these exams are built on the same underlying psychometric structure, which is give hundreds, thousands of people problems, see how many people get it right, and that tells you roughly how difficult it is. So in that sense, these exams are constructed similarly, but they also test the same skills. So if you're thinking that the GRE is going to be easier than the GMAT, or the GMAT is going to be easier than the EA, you're kind of fooling yourself. You might prefer one to the other, and that's totally valid, but you're going to have to put the same work in. And make no mistake, every MBA program knows the equivalence between one and the next. So, so the differences are in which skills different exams highlight. To use the GMAT as our base of comparison, the executive assessment has all the same problems, all the same problem types, except that, well, it doesn't have geometry, but more importantly, it incorporates integrated reasoning, which is data processing and sorting and dealing with really a fire hose of information. It puts that section into the aggregate score, whereas on the GMAT, integrated reasoning is a separate thing. And so for more seasoned professionals, for those especially who are a little less comfortable quantitatively, but have been working a lot in Excel and in complex informational environments, this can give you a boost to your aggregate score. The GRE as an exam, on the verbal side, it is structured a little differently, but also has a lot of vocabulary. And that doesn't mean that one needs to memorize lists and lists of vocabulary, although it's helpful, or at least to know the popular roots, especially the Greek and Roman roots. But it's still testing the same thing. Can you pick out what's intended from the other signals in the problem and then plug in the word that's correct? So it's not about knowing the words. It's still about understanding more deeply what the problems are going after, how they're intending to separate you from the rest of the people in your cohort. That is, where they're trying to cue an incorrect response, or more likely, where they're being, or to say it better, where they're being very clear and where you're more likely to get something incorrect because you're missing the subtlety or not looking at it at the right level or from the right angle. And so, but GRE versus GMAT, the quantitative comparison and data sufficiency are very similar problem types. They look different, but as you work with this stuff like we do year in, year out, these are almost the exact same problem type, and the underlying skills that you need to address them both are exactly the same. So ultimately, we advise people to go with their comfort level and also get a sense from the programs that they're looking at, and of course from their admissions consultants and advisors, as to what test is going to suit them best.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess we answered two questions there. The EA is also significantly shorter than the other two exams, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's only an hour and a half versus close to 3 hours for the GMAT. So for those with stamina issues, the EA can be a better choice. That said, once again, consult with Linda or whomever might be advising you, friends, family, admissions office, as to what they're looking for, because the executive assessment is originally at least intended for the executive MBA.
Right.
And so you want to make sure that you're taking the exam that the program is expecting and that's going to put you in the best light.
Right. There are more schools that are requiring or are accepting rather the EA more and more. Like some are accepting anything you can send them, but the EA definitely has increased acceptability among full-time MBA programs. I think more than was ever anticipated. Um, but I think, Mike, your advice: make sure that the programs you're interested in accept it, or otherwise just take the GMAT or the GRE.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're going to have to take 2 tests, and you definitely don't want to do that if you can avoid it.
And if I may,
yeah, sure.
say there's a few schools that have rolled out their own exams, INSEAD, IE in Spain, and while many of these exams are great if that's the one and only school you want to go to, otherwise you're better served going with a more popular exam.
Sure. Yeah, a great point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What are your top 3 tips for GMAT prep?
There are so many, and they're specific to the individual. It's really hard because everyone comes at it with a different mix of strengths and weaknesses. So I'd say the number one tip is don't work hard, work smart. Meaning that if you're spending a lot of time and not seeing a lot of movement, that means you need to change something. And we see this a lot where people have been spending hours and hours and a lot of resources doing the same thing over and over again. And of course, doing 10 problems in 20 minutes, looking at the back of the book saying, oh, wow, I got that right. Great. I can move on. Oh, I got that wrong. What did I miss? Oh, I knew that. I'll review my notes better, but I'll get that next time. That feels good because it feels like you're doing something, but it's incredibly low yield. It's just like preparing for a race. You can just run that race again and again, prepare for a marathon. You can just run 26 miles a day, but really other things come into play. Good sleep, good diet, of course, but going to the gym, working on your pacing, putting yourself in a mindset to succeed. These things are just as vital, and the same goes for test preparation. And so look beyond what it is you think you ought to be doing.
That's a good one.
Number 2, I'd say zoom out. And that's a very generic thing to say. So it requires a little explanation.
Especially today with all the Zooming we're doing. But anyways.
Indeed. These exams, the GMAT and the others we've spoken about, they test logical reasoning, which means if you're making it about the vocabulary word, if you're making it about the formula, you've missed the larger point. And the larger point is understanding that there are multiple solution paths to every problem, and that simply knowing how to do a problem correctly is not enough for success. You need to be able to do that problem efficiently, and you need to see the whole picture of the problem, meaning that a lot of times it's not getting to the answer. But in these multiple choice exams, it's about selecting the correct answer choice. And many times that can be done at a characteristic level. You don't have to arrive at 73.12 if the other answers are 7 and 700. There's only one answer that's going to be in that 70-ish range. You don't have to get the precise word to go to the GRE or the precise answer that's in your head for a critical reasoning problem on the GMAT. All you need to do is say, well, it's going to look something like this. And once you start doing that, all of a sudden, a lot of we call them DSMs, default solving mechanisms, and these time-wasting things that we're doing fall away. Finally, this is a big one, take fewer practice exams.
Really? That's an unusual. I'm surprised at that one.
Yeah. We actually have a video about this on our YouTube about the 6 most common mistakes preppers make. Practice exams are often misused, and most people use them as a way to rank where they are now,
right?
Which really doesn't matter when you're preparing. It's sort of like running a race as fast as you can and saying, well, you know, I got this time. You know, I ran the race as fast as I could. How much time did it take? Well, it doesn't matter. You want to run it faster. So you're going to focus on those skills that's going to help you to run it faster. And people get psyched out, they get preoccupied with the score that they're receiving, rather than using practice exams for what they are, which are calibration tools. Practice tests are for calibrating your timing decisions, for understanding how you're operating under pressure, for identifying weaknesses and places where you're not handling problems, even if you're getting them correct in the way you want to be. And most importantly, for experimentation. If you're focused on performing on a practice exam, you're not focused on using the new skills you've been developing during all your self-prep, whether with a tutor on your own or otherwise. And so if you are preoccupied with the score, you end up DSMing, you end up going back and grabbing that side of the pool and not actually building confidence in the new ways. So wrapping that up, practice exams are great for calibrating and figuring out what you're doing wrong, but then you have to put in the work in between the practice exams. Doing a practice exam every week is too much. Doing a practice exam every day is frankly insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're not sure, and this isn't a plug for Apex, but more generally, provide yourself with a teacher. Find a guide, find a friend, find a loved one, find a mentor at work, someone who's been through it and who can advise you on what worked for them. And then question every single thing you hear from them and find 2 other people just like it. Because what works for one does not work for another. But don't do this in a vacuum. It's a recipe for disaster.
I'm just thinking of none of my kids took the GMAT, but I'm just thinking about raising my kids, and certainly their learning styles were so different. I remember there was one particular teacher who was an outstanding teacher, and my youngest just did not get her geometry. It just was not going in. And again, nothing against the teacher. The approach she had taken worked for the 4 other kids, did not work for this one.
Yeah, and that's the case with all teachers and with all students. There's no one size fits all. And especially as you're pushing for elite performance, and sometimes well, it's rare that we have anyone who doesn't say, I want a 700, I want to go to a top school, which is very natural. But to get that elite performance, you need to get beyond the basics and find the ways to make your mind work at its highest capacity. And I think this is worth noting, that many people, when they're preparing, are focused on the wrong skills. They're focused on all the tools at their disposal without focusing on growing their skills and their ability. To use a metaphor, imagine going into a craftsman shop, woodworker. There are plenty of people out there who are preparing by saying, oh, that's a picture, that's a hammer, that's a saw, that's a screwdriver. And they go to the test and they say, well, oh, this is a hammer problem, that's a saw problem, that's a screwdriver problem. But they've never picked them up. They've never built, and when they're told build a birdhouse, it doesn't come out great because they've never used the tools. Many others use the tools, but they keep building that same birdhouse over and over, and they've got a beautiful birdhouse. And they get on the GMAT, and the GMAT says, okay, we'll build a chair. And the chair doesn't come out well because they've been focused on the project rather on how to use the tools better. And so a lot of times people get into these cycles where they keep focusing on repeating the things they already know, which is comfortable. It feels like you're making progress. Rather than working on the things that you don't know and going into the places where you're less comfortable.
Right. That is, I think, one of the, in talking to other test prep professionals, I say that's one of the biggest or most common mistakes applicants make. They focus on what they already know as opposed to what they don't know, which is much more comfortable, but much less productive, because what you have to improve is what you don't know.
for sure.
What are, I mean, I think we've kind of touched on this already in terms of common applicant mistakes in preparing for the exam. I guess repeating, again, what they know as opposed to what they don't know, taking too many practice exams. What about on test day itself? What are some common mistakes that make it?
Or,
Yeah.
okay.
You can also mention good things to do, but
Yeah,
I'm not opposed to it.
And the advice is stop preparing 24 hours in advance of your exam. The common mistake is people do it, they're sitting there in the exam with their notes or in the waiting room with their notes. If you haven't learned it by now, you're not going to learn it. And so the last 24 hours and really the last couple of days before the exam, it's time to get yourself into a good headspace. You should be eating well. You should be sleeping well. You should be not partaking in alcohol and other substances if that's your custom. You really should be just focused on de-stressing. Keep yourself out of stressful situations, away from people that stress you out. Another thing that's really vital is expect something to go wrong, especially at the test center. There's a bit of what they call lab coat or white coat syndrome in going to take a test. That syndrome is when you go to a doctor, your blood pressure tends to be higher because there's something just mildly unsettling for most people about being in the doctor's office. Something could be wrong. And so there's this medical phenomenon, it's well documented, where people have higher blood pressures when their blood pressure is taken compared to all these other times. The same thing happens at the testing center. So expect something to go wrong. Expect, the person checking you in to be rude. Expect someone to have the sniffles when you're sitting next to them in the testing. And once you're mentally prepared for that, then you can sort of put that aside. One great thing for those with test anxiety, and this is one of our secrets, go to the testing center a couple of times before you test. It's not about making sure you know the traffic patterns or where the front door is, although that's a side effect. But if you're going to be triggered, if you're going to be unnerved by being there, simply the act of going there and desensitizing yourself to that stimuli a little bit can really get in front of test anxiety.
Okay, that's great advice. Yeah, it makes sense. It's no longer a foreign place.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Go hang out in the lobby, read a book, and eventually you're gonna calm down about it a little bit.
That's true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I have to tell the audience about you were kind enough to invite me and a few of the other accepted consultants to a little mini session, and Mike gave us some questions and had us solve them on the spot or attempt to solve them on the spot. And it was fascinating. I haven't taken a standardized test in decades, and I think that was true of the other two consultants who were there at the time. And it was fascinating how easy it was to just miss key elements in the question. I did okay on the GMAT years ago, but obviously, again, I haven't looked at that kind of thing in decades. So the ability to analyze the question, eliminate options that were completely irrelevant, or just see things that were not misleading, but were meant to mislead,
Mm-hmm.
was just fascinating. A little humiliating, humbling, but still fascinating. Definitely increased my empathy for students taking these exams.
Well, I have to say, Linda, it ought not to be.
Humbling or
all of it. It's very natural. And these are things that our brain does that we're wired to do. We see, okay, we're going to talk about, apples, bananas, and I don't know, fruit that begins with C. What do we got?
Cherries.
Cherries. There we go. Apples, bananas, and cherries. It turns out I did know one. I just couldn't. And it's very natural to start thinking about the apples first because it was presented first. Right. Or even has the letter A and our mind associates that with number one, start here. Right? Mm-hmm. Right. Since we were 2 years old, A comes first, right?
Right.
We're wired to organize information certain ways. And so a lot of people think these exams are about intelligence or knowing the formulas and all that stuff. And really, it's about attentiveness. It's about sensitivity. It's about self-discipline and about really sharpening your process for dealing with information. And this is something that's incredibly hard to do. It needs, it takes habitual work to do. But it's also something that we do very well in situations where we know we need it. You read a contract very differently than you read a Harry Potter book. You solve a problem when it's about the money in your pocket very differently than when it's about Annie selling oranges at the seashore. And so a lot of times it's about making it real to yourself, but also understanding that the focus ought to be on how you're processing, organizing, and approaching information, not on the underlying skills. Those underlying skills, while they take a little bit of work, are relatively easy to load. And it doesn't matter if you're at a 400 or 700, those fundamentals and the mechanics can be learned in short order. Everything else is what you do with those tools.
Right. Right. And you were very clear in presenting the material, I have to say, in that 1 hour. It was fun. It was fun. Any last advice for applicants about to take either the GMAT, the EA, or the GRE? Perhaps test day tips, or whatever.
I'd refer back to something I've kind of been alluding to throughout the hour, but I've never come out and said it. Be kind to yourself. Take the pressure off yourself. You are not your GMAT score. It's not the measure of your self-worth. And frankly, we don't let any instructor in the door at Apex who is proud of their GMAT score. That's not what it's about. It's one part, it's necessary, but not sufficient. It's one part of a much larger profile. And many candidates, applicants really build it up in their mind that it's the be all end all and that it has to come first. And again, it's necessary, but your applications are just as necessary. Your work is just as necessary. But you know what? Being a good person is also necessary. Spending time with your family. These are much more important things. And when you look back on it, you're not going to be thinking about your GMAT score. So take it in stride and give yourself a break. And oddly enough, when you do so, whether you've been prepping a long time and not getting where you want to be, or more generally, you give yourself a break at the emotional level, that tends to be the catharsis that allows for great performance.
In many areas of life too. But no, you're 100% right. You're 100% right on the first exam, but I also like to tell people, especially if they're retaking an exam, I said, you have nowhere but up to go. You got your floor. There's no downside here. It's all upside. Now, the first exam, it's harder to take that attitude, but the second time it's like, there's just upside now.
It's $250 in an afternoon. And if you go in and you score 740, we'll sit it again in 2 weeks because maybe you're going to do better.
It's possible too. The 740, I tend to tell them to just take, but depending upon the applicant, but almost always. But that's, I think the advice to, like you say, be kind to yourself is excellent advice. It is definitely not a measure of self-worth. I think it's somewhere on Accepted's website, actually. And something that applicants should definitely keep in mind. So Mike, I want to thank you very much for joining me today. Where can listeners and potential applicants learn more about Apex?
They can find us at apexgmat.com. That has our GMAT and Executive Assessment materials, or apexgre.com if you're interested in the GRE. Also, we're rolling out a new tool, apexgmat.com/calculator. Right now it's for the GMAT, where you can go on, input a bunch of background information. I warn you, it's a bit of a longer form, but we've gotten pretty good at sort of understanding both where someone's likely to be, even if you haven't started the GMAT process yet, but also getting a sense from things of your background, sort of where the range of potential is both now and where you can likely be. And so it's a really great way to get started in the process, calibrate, what the reasonableness is for achieving a certain score and the timeline that you're looking at. And
Oh, wow.
so
That sounds like a very useful tool.
it's designed to really give you a sense of what the process looks like. Of course, you can always speak with any one of us. We don't have a sales force here. We just have instructors who do this full time and care about you and your success. That's why we're all in this business. We all started elsewhere. We're all dedicated educators. So from there, you can give us a call anytime, and we're happy to speak with you.
Sounds great. Thank you. Could you also send me a link to that calculator?
Absolutely.
All right, and maybe I think you mentioned earlier a video also that you
Yes.
that'd be great. Okay, so thank you again, Mike. Quick reminder to the listeners, reserve your seat for Get Accepted to INSEAD, a masterclass that I will present on Wednesday, February 3rd. It's free, but you do need to register. Please do so ASAP at accepted.com/402MC. Again, that's accepted.com/402MC to reserve your seat. Listener, thank you too for joining Mike Diamond and me for our 402nd episode. If you found this show worthwhile, I have a favor to ask. Please share your thoughts. Just go to lovethepodcast.com/AST. Again, that URL is lovethepodcast.com/AST, and you'll be able to rate and review on iTunes and other leading podcast sites. Doing so helps potential listeners find us and is very much appreciated by us and by them. Thanks again for coming. This is Admission Straight Talk produced by Accepted, and I am your host, Linda Abraham. I'll talk to you again next week.